We're on.
Ding. Oh God.
This one's being brought to you remote from
Oh,
Studio Toronto.
yeah, Studio Toronto. This is a big event. Jamie became the show producer tonight, and the host. I hope your production value is as high as it when it streams from my house. But I don't know.
I've already tendered my resignation.
It's not accepted until the end of this show.
I don't like this.
Hello,
game.
everybody. Episode. Where are we at?
I don't know.
Oh, you look great.
14, 15, 12, but good episode. New episode. It's called Studio Chatter, which for those who may not know what Studio Chatter is, it's the conversation and casual talking that's picked up on tape when one is recording. However, the conversation today will be anything but casual. Yeah, studio picked up some studio chatter between Paul and Ringo, or something like that. But today's episode features somebody. Oh yes, that's funny. Ian needs a link. Dan, you want to email Ian that link? Today features a guy.
Yeah. Oh yes, I will.
An incredibly knowledgeable music guy. I haven't seen him for a long time, but Dan most definitely has been hanging out with him.
We have coffee.
Yeah. And so he's got a lot of cool stories that he's going to talk about. He's got a lot of cool stories he's going to share. We're going to talk about the state of the music industry. We're going to talk about the state of the studio industry. We're going to talk about some of the artists he's worked with. And this dude has worked with a lot of artists. And he'll join us very shortly.
His full CV will be posted online.
It's pretty nuts.
I was thinking about why. Sorry, you go ahead.
You go.
Did I interrupt?
No.
Oh,
I'm done.
I was thinking about what was So Ian, Jamie, and I both know Ian from for different reasons, but we nevertheless got getting a lot of messages here. Stand by for 1 second. Great. We both know Ian for different reasons, but I think that our curiosity about a guy like Ian comes from the fact that we grew up in probably like an awareness grew up learning and knowing about studios when they were only analog, in the sense it was about tape and it was about big consoles, and it was like we grew up in the last era of the studio being something that was unavailable to most musicians. The notion of a home studio was like beyond 99% of people's grasp. I remember the first thing that I bought to record at my house. Well, you bought a 4-track tape recorder in 1986, but in terms of like a multi-track digital audio station, we were first limited to 8 tracks and really bad audio recording, and it seemed like a very different approach to what we knew about recording, because the first time I ever recorded anything, it was in a recording studio on a 1-inch 16-track tape machine that you were limited to how many effects, like real hardware effects, there were in the racks or in the studio, and however many channels there were on tape and how many channels there were on the console. And so there was a bit of admiration, folklore about that whole period that we got to dip our toes into, and then the world went more or less digital and changed certainly sonics and changed the way that people record, and then ultimately changed the sound of everything, and now everybody's got a studio on their iPad even. So what I think is cool about Ian is he's a guy who's came a couple of decades before us and was like soaked in that real studio analog tape kind of environment, that and he took big chances in terms of building recording studios. The first one he built, I think, was in Montreal, and he was therefore influential in the style of the dance music that was coming out of there at the time, because he was the guy behind the console. And it was a period where engineers were producers, and producers kind of had to be engineers most of the time, or at least have a much better sense of what that art was. And then Ian made yet another leap into having a lot of faith in digital, as it was coming out long before most people considered it a viable alternative to tape. And on the way made a ton of cool records and worked with a lot of cool people, and then turned around and became a teacher of studio recording techniques at a place called Humber College in Toronto, where Jamie has been is a professor emeritus as well. And
for a brief period.
So yeah, your month-long tenure.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think that we're having Ian on because I can't wait to hear his stories. I mean, I've heard a lot of them, and I've heard 10% of them, and maybe you'll be able to see the admiration in our eyes as we listen to a recording legend who's been all around the world making amazing music, who still, however, needs me to text him to tell him how to join the Zoom call. So Jamie, in the interim, could you fill some air while
I could. Oh, I can. What's interesting is for me, for talking to a guy like Ian, is that he straddles both the yesterday of this, which is the golden age of the studio world, with the today of the studio world. And I definitely not golden, but he's able to, he sees it from both sides of the fence. Like, he runs a lot of recording programs now at Humber, and he, basically runs the studio that's there, and deals with a lot of engineers that are up and coming. And his approach, a lot of the not good engineers are stuck in their own ways. And when all this stuff came around, they were hesitant to embrace it, not realizing that they were basically ending their careers if they didn't. And as Dan said, Ian was able to approach it from a progressive, realistic too. But at the time, I don't think it was realistic. I think it was just a willingness to try different things, which is really important for a studio engineer, right? Or for a musician, any creative artist. And engineers are definitely creative artists, at least the good ones are. And so his willingness to not block that off and claim that this could only be the way it was in whatever year, I think it's enabled him to remain relevant, and which is why he's still around now, as opposed to a bunch of old previous studio engineers that now don't have a gig, or are bitter and are forced to do things that they think they don't want to do, which is, Ian's in the minority that way, in that he was open. He was like good engineers, sopping up anything that was available to him in terms of information or data or learning, or ideas. And he approached it outside of the studio too, in terms of what to learn, what to apply, and how to deal with other people who may not have the same ideas as he has in the moment, which is a great trait. Is he around, Dan? You want to bring him in? Or
also, yes. Yeah, I think he's ready to go. I think you got to press the welcome Ian button.
Me. And
ladies and gentlemen,
with no other fanfare, I'm going to bring Ian in now, and he's going to talk to us about some great things. There he is, Mr. Ian Terry. Hello,
ta-da!
sir. Welcome to
Mr.
the
Ian
Dan
Terry.
and Jamie show. I'd probably run a little intro clip for you here, but I'm behind the 8 ball, so I don't have any cues lined up. Sorry.
That's
Dan?
okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Do you have audio?
I think so. Are you
We
there?
can hear you.
You hear me?
Have we got
Can
you?
you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
We can hear you, and you can hear us, I hope.
Yes, and I can
Okay,
see
good.
you. So we're doing well
technology.
so far.
Daniel, you want to slide us in here with Ian?
Well, Ian, I don't know if you were watching the time delayed
I was not.
Facebook
I was
Live where I
actually
was doing
music.
a long intro about you, but we were explaining why Ian on the show, and I was saying that you are of the generation of guys who did who got to do the really mythical thing, which was to work in a recording studio when they were exclusive spaces that were hard to get into because they were expensive, and tape was expensive, and gear was expensive, and expertise was expensive. And and yet that's Jamie and I growing up, that was the only thing we knew about recording, because that was the only thing that was going on in recording, other than the beginning of digital, which didn't really wasn't on most people's radar until much later. And so you have, whereas we've had one fantastical foot in both sides of the analog and digital worlds, and the culture around the studios that were parts that, whatever, consistent with those times. So we've had like one fantastical foot in the analog studio world, growing up with knowing about all of the recording heroes who made the records that we were interested in and curious about. But we've spent most of our time in the digital space, having nevertheless been kind of apprenticed, I think, in analog and tape and big consoles and studios, whereas you got to do it. And so every time you come over for coffee to my house and, casually mention one of any hundreds of projects that you're working on, I'm like, fuck, if I only had been able to spend one day in one of those studios or one of those experiences. And so I think you're here because I mean, particularly Jamie knows a ton about the folklore around records that were made, let's say, a longer time ago, that would have been exclusively in that, professional studio domain. And yet here we find ourselves in a completely different paradigm that, in many ways has allowed the New Deal to exist by virtue of being able to affordably, reliably, and always record what we do. But nevertheless, it's a very different world. And not only did you spend a lot of time in and have great success in, let's say, the previous world, you were a pioneer in the digital world, all the while making really fucking cool records, and in Canada, like building a cool studio in Canada before you went to America. So
I came back.
I guess we just wanted to hear some stories. I think probably, yeah, you came back. Welcome back. It's great to have you back. And you've had many iterations of that career.
I'd like to know, because I mean, I know about you from just because you're Ian Terry, but I'm curious as to how you ended up in the studio biz in the first place, like a million years ago. We're in Montreal. Is that where you were based initially, or?
Yeah, I was based in Montreal. I went to McGill. I spent 4 years at McGill and in economics and political science.
Perfect studio engineer degree.
Yeah. The last year, I kind of found, in fourth year, I found what I wanted to do. And that was, I was fortunate to be vice chairman of Freshman Reception and vice chairman of Winter Carnival. Now, any of you have been to Montreal, Winter Carnival, especially in the 60s, was huge.
Right.
It was just the thing that the school stopped. No one did anything. No one worked anyway in university, but school stopped and sponsors came out of the woodwork. We collect several hundreds of thousands of dollars to sponsor this. And
Wow.
And this is in 1969.
Oh, for sure.
So it's a lot of money. In today's, it must be close to $1 million now. In Winter Carnival, I was in charge of booking all the entertainment.
Oh, that should be good.
And I was hanging out also at the Café Andre, which was just downstairs from the Laugh-In, which I don't know if anybody knew about the Laugh-In, but I mean, Trevor Prane and the Triangle were up there, and they had a lot of people who were quite famous at the time doing rock and roll, and it was all psychedelica. And I said, I want to be in music. And of course, it was the 60s, so everyone played guitar, right?
Right.
I attempted to play guitar and played very badly, and found out years later why I was playing so badly is because the fretboard was about 1.5 inches away from the strings. It was a $25 guitar. What can I tell you?
That would make it complicated.
And nylon string. So then I became a drummer because heck, anyone can hit drums.
Right, of course.
And so, yeah, that didn't work out very well. I think I earned $25 as a professional drummer in one gig. It was good though. It was good pay for one gig. And then I said, well, how do I get into music? Because what I live for is the buzz. I live for the moment. You all know the moment. You've played live and you know when the moment happens.
Sure.
And the same moment happens in studio. And when you're there at that moment, there's no better feeling in life for me.
Mhm.
So I went to Eastman in 1970, School of Music,
Oh yeah,
and
that's
tried to learn some stuff and was taught by some people, and then came back and got a job in a studio and got fired and got rehired and got fired again, and then got hired at Andre Perry's studio when he was installing the only first 32 track studio in the world with the first Olive console in the world.
In Montreal.
In Montreal, in his famous
Wow.
church that he built in 1972. I think that was 71. Sorry, 71, fall of 71. And the rest is history. I just kept doing it. In 72, I worked with people who founded Studio Tempo and then became a co-owner and chief engineer. And the neat thing about Studio Tempo is it wasn't in the normal way that people did, was if you worked in a studio, you worked in a studio. You didn't go anywhere else. You always worked in the studio. But I had no salary. Matter of fact, I hadn't had a salary since university, a summertime job. And so I worked all over the world. I was lucky to be in Joburg and Johannesburg and Paris and London and LA and New York and subsequent to that, Singapore and Hong Kong. And
wow. And
Argentina
working in studios there, like
almost always studios. I did
Right.
some live stuff at the beginning. I went on the road in 72, 73, I think, or 71, 72, with Jean-Pierre Ferlin, who was a big artist in Quebec. And then I went on the road very briefly with Mahogany Rush. No
Frank
bells.
Marino. Frank
Yes,
Marino,
absolutely.
no
Frank-
bells.
Because I worked on Frank's first album, because it came out of a studio that destroyed it, and we kind of put it back together again, which was called Maxum. And then I did subsequently about 4, 5, 6, 7 records with Frank. But we went on the road because he had a Neve console on the road.
On the road.
On the road, which was unheard of. But he loved the sound of the Neve because that's the
A
first
Neve
record I
console
did with him. Live.
Unbelievable.
Neve consoles, for anybody else who's listening, are things that to move them is like moving a building every time
Yeah.
you
It was
want to
it was a truck on
another
its
venue,
own.
and also cost the equivalent of a
They were expensive at
never
the time.
used for live.
And I can remember doing in Detroit a concert with him there. And I mean, he'd take that upper E string and hold it up in the top fret, and he'd just hold it and let it feed back. And it was 6,000 watts of a Shoko PA system that was, people would be bleeding from the ears. I was wearing headphones, not plugged in, doing the sound.
Yeah, that was I think the state of touring back then, which was as loud as you could go and then maybe a little bit louder. And then everybody went deaf, and then they changed.
I didn't go deaf, and I decided I didn't want to do live much. I did some from time to time only for groups that I worked with in the studio because I knew the material.
Yeah.
And of course,
live's a whole different animal. It's, you talk about getting into the zone, or that moment where it hits and you feel it. Doing sound live oftentimes is like, let's just get everything up, and we don't have a lot of time, and let's make sure that we got everything going. And okay, the band's hitting. All right, let's go. Let's mix.
It's live.
Often,
let's go.
Yeah, it's live. Let's go. And the good live guys are like they're kind of like snipers or something. They get into position quickly and they take their shot, and it hits, and then they pack up and move on.
It's like
a different breed.
Lack of control killed me. I like to be in control.
Absolutely.
And so that became my role as an engineer, to control the chaos, because making music is chaotic and should be chaotic, in my opinion anyway, unless you're doing a movie score, which is all laid out in advance.
Right.
The creation part should be quite chaotic. And of course we did that, months and months of studio on an album. I remember those days.
I was watching. I was recently watching an old NFB film, and it was following along with a prog rock band from, I guess they're from Quebec City. They might have been moved to Montreal from the 70s, called Harmonium.
Yeah.
And it took them out to LA where they were doing some shows, and they had the amount of gear that they had piled onto the Starwood stage was unbelievable. And I was thinking to myself, to getting this stuff down on tape. I mean, I don't know if you ever worked with those guys, but I was
I did.
watching this going,
Know them all.
yeah, tell me a little bit about that. Like, I mean, these guys had, I saw like 25 different instruments or 20 different instruments on stage there. It's been
Well,
amazing to me to
they
see.
had multiple instrumentalists. I mean, they had 2 or 3 bass players at the time. Louis Valois was one, and Bill Gagnon was another one. And it was all part of Villemard Blues Band that then morphed into Harmonium. And they did an album, the first album, which was a double album that they did. I did not work on. It was Michel Lachance, but they figured they spent $100,000 in tuning the 12 string.
Yeah.
just it was to get the 12 string in tune. And of course, you play a 12 string, you know that after the first 4 chords, it's out of tune again.
Yeah, it's out of tune again, which is
And
kind of the charm.
It's analog, so they would do they'd do a verse, and then they'd punch in for the chorus, and then they'd do the next verse, and then punch in for the chorus, because they'd have to retune all the time. They took about 6 months
compared to the cost of one laptop and one microphone for the Billie Eilish record that probably had some investment of about $7,000 to make one of the most compelling records of the last couple of years. That largesse, that $100,000 tuning bill is, I think, is part of that the lore that we again grew up knowing about, just the or the stories of, let's say,
well, they sold records. They sold records,
and their
they
studio tape costs and whatever.
They sold in Canada. I think they sold 300,000 or 400,000 records. So and it was a double album.
Oh my god!
You know, someone
like
just posted
platinum now in Canada.
Someone posted a comment here about your mastering work or your general work with Oscar Peterson, and I want to talk a little bit about that, because some of the engineers I've talked to in the past, the good ones, at least I find, their approach is their approach. It doesn't matter if they're recording or working with a hard rock band, a heavy metal band, or a jazz trio. I mean, the mics may change, or the room may change, but the approach to how you want to take the chaos and distill it into a record remains the same. Would you say that in your experience and in your life that you maintain the same approach, or did you take a different sort of outlook with each artist that you worked with?
No artist is the same. I listened to a podcast yesterday given by Annie Mincelli. Do you know Anne Mincelli? Works with exclusively with Alicia Keys and others, and Jay-Z and all that. She has a great studio, a 3-room studio in New York called Jungle City. I really resonated with what she said. She's, of course, younger, but she's got these huge consoles and likes the analog and likes all of that stuff. And she says, a microphone for a singer will change with the song, because depending on what key it's in, the microphone is appropriate or not appropriate. And depending on the singer, it's appropriate or not appropriate. So, for example, Oscar Peterson, the mic setup on the piano was totally different from it was for other people that I'd worked with, Oliver Jones and others. That I knew Oscar, it was after he had his stroke, so his left hand was not as functional as it was, but of course he played more with his right hand than most people play with 2. And Oscar also, he didn't suffer fools lightly, so you had to have it ready and going right away. He didn't want.
That's interesting.
He didn't want to play around. He didn't want sound checks.
Right, you wanted to hit.
Yeah, I mean, is this it? Is this what I'm playing? Okay, are you recording? And the thing is, I'm always recording.
Right.
There's no sound check in studio for me. Never was a sound check.
Sure.
Not for the artist. For the drummer, the bassist, yeah, get a level, but it's a recording studio.
Yeah.
It's not a checking studio. It's not a sound check studio. It's a recording studio. So you record everything.
Yeah.
And a lot of the artists I worked with were first take people. Jeanette Renaud was famous for that. She was another one, didn't suffer fools lightly. Diane Dufresne was another one. She didn't suffer fools lightly. Matter of fact, most of them ended up wearing a tequila bottle if they didn't do it right. So you just had to be recording. And so, and Leonard Cohen did not want to know about, did you get that? He would never ask that. He'd just say, let's listen to it, because he assumed you got it.
Right.
And of course, I got it.
Right.
Better or worse. I mean, it's not necessarily, you can sound check yourself to death, but you don't want to kill the mood.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, what is a music? You know, music is emotion.
Yeah, it is. It is an act of the
Dan,
moment.
did you fall down?
No. Honestly, I'm trying to find mosquito repellent.
He's drinking again.
I'm actually outside. No, that's right here. You can't see the glass because somehow. Oh, there it is.
There it is.
No, I am. I'm actually sitting on a dock, and I am getting, because I'm not at my house right now. Anyway, long story is, I'm sitting at a friend's dock, and they were like, "Don't worry, the mosquitoes aren't bad this time of year." But I keep trying to look inside another cupboard to see if I can find mosquito repellent.
That was one of the best concerts I ever saw, actually.
Which was that?
Mosquito repellent
on the dock of the bay.
At Live Oak Docks.
Otis Redding.
Wow.
Oh,
Expo
no way.
67.
Oh, amazing.
Oh, nice. He played Expo 67.
He played Expo 67 in Montreal.
Yeah.
And he did that, and so did the king, the boss, the man, did it as well. So we were very lucky to have that.
The king, the boss, the man?
Yeah. The one that everyone played for.
Well, there's Frank Sinatra or there's Elvis?
No, not in blues. Not in soul.
Oh, in blues. BB King.
No, well, actually, I saw BB too, but no.
The king, the boss, the man at Expo 67.
Yeah, he was there.
Who else were you working or were you watching?
In blues.
I was watching. It was a concert.
Right.
Blues, soul music.
You were out of the live business by then.
No, he wasn't even in it yet. You went down to the States. When did you do that? You were down there by 72?
86.
Oh, you went down in 86 and you were in Canada, right, for the rest of
86. Before that, I was in Canada or traveling, but I got a room, an apartment. I shared an apartment with a good friend of mine who was a sax player. And then I traveled New York, Montreal.
Back and forth. What was, so then you got a good viewpoint on, well, I want to say the music industry, but if we could say the studio industry between Canada and the US. What can you give me or us your thoughts on the differences? Either back then, I mean, now we know it, but money.
It's all money.
Yeah. And
the equipment's all the same. It's a Neve console, it's an SSL console, it's a API console, it's whether you're in Minneapolis or whether you're in Des Moines, Iowa, it's
right.
It's all the same. In New York, New York is different as a city. It's a pressure cooker, but the studios, it's just money.
Right.
I mean, Andre Perry in 1971 charged $120 an hour for a 32 track. It was the first 32 track in the world. And it really didn't work. It was technology kind of cobbled together.
The machine didn't work?
Well, it wasn't really 32, and it was a bear to work with. I mean, to get it to work. I mean, you basically had two machines locked together, but there was no SMPTE then, right? So you didn't have time code. It was a form of pilot tone, and you had to push start at the same time after lining up the tape to a mark. And 1 out of 3 times you'd actually get in sync. And
what's the worst that could happen?
Worse is one of the machines could die.
As
and
you,
you'd have only 15 track.
Oh God. Oh no.
Did a lot of that though.
That makes me. Well, we had that problem with ADAT machines, with losing sync and forever losing, you know, eight tracks at a time, never to sync up again with the other recorded material or whatever. I remember that. These are all things, you know, exclusively of the past now, unless you're married to recreating the sound of Queen and syncing up a bunch of tape machines. But what makes me a question that comes to mind is that was he was the man behind syncing multiple tape machines.
No, he was the man behind Queen.
Yeah, and Mutt Lange's, he was Mutt Lange's engineer.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Def Leppard and
no, but I guess those guys didn't use very many tracks at all, did they? Def Leppard? I listened to a Def Leppard record the other day and I was thinking, God, there are more vocals on this than however many.
I've got the multi-tracks here
must be
somewhere.
Dozens and dozens of vocal tracks. Oh yeah,
there's a lot of comps.
But Ian, you would have seen for example, you know, there are some pretty good records that the Beatles made using 8 tracks, right? And then they had a taste of 16 tracks. And then if the Beatles had endless channels as they are now, maybe they would have made different records. And certainly I think the addition of like records like Sgt. Pepper's wouldn't have been possible without more tracks, but it was still a lot of efficiencies and economy and decisions that you couldn't go back on. And so nevertheless, it was more expansive than, let's say, records they made in 1963. But the example that the example that I'm giving is that there is, I think there were liminal stages in the addition of tracks going from 4 to 8 to 16. But when you get from 16 to 32 to 64 to then infinite, you as the guy behind the console must have witnessed how that changed the way that people played, wrote, produced, arranged, and recorded music. And I'd be interested to know whether you think it's empirically better, empirically not as good, empirically you couldn't say, but you would have seen it all.
Well, I won't make a decision on that other than I do have an opinion on it, but I saw at AES, Audio Engineering Society convention in New York one year, I think probably 15 years ago. These young people who were having some success, and I don't remember the name, but they had started in university. They were making records in their dorm, and then they actually built a studio, and they were doing somebody who had made some hits, and they were kind of important, and they were up there talking, and the moderator said, well, you know, you like analog. And he says, yeah, I have an 8-track Studer. I do everything on 8-track. 8-track, I mean, digital was readily available in multiple tracks, of course. And they said, well, why? And they said, well, first of all, it sounds okay. It doesn't sound as good as Pro Tools, but it sounds okay. He says, but, you know, we record these bands and then they come in and the guitar player says, you know, I can do a better solo. So I look at the guitar player and I say, well, okay, are you sure? Oh yeah, I'm sure. Well, you better, because we have to erase this one to get the new one. So it better be better.
Yeah.
And, you know, he says, it's amazing. It's always better. Whereas if I have Pro Tools and multiple tracks, I'm getting 35 solos that I have to comp half bars from.
Yeah, we just finished an EP, the New Deal did, where I was actually I composed and performed the majority of it, at least for the keyboards and everything in the solos. And then I sent it to our drummer and to Dan. And I had mentioned at the time that you either played it and you kept it, or you played it again for me. It was like, I'm not going back with a catalog of parts that I'm going to listen to. I'm either going to I'm going to say, yeah, this was good, and now we move on, or I'm going to say, no, I'm going to do it again, and I'm erasing it, because there is nothing worse to me as someone who works in the studio and someone who plays music, to have to try and sift through multiple takes of something. Like you said earlier, you either feel it or you don't, and if you feel it, then we're done. It doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It's you feel it, you like it, and it is the one, and now we're moving on.
That's what the producer hat is for.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're a musician, artist, creator, and also the producer, and you don't have someone else to bounce it off of, you put the producer hat on and you go, how's that?
Yeah.
And very few people can do that and be objective about their own performance. Good for you if you can.
Well, to me, thank you, but I just chalk it up to, yeah, I think that's good. All right, next one.
Yeah.
It's not going to get better. The chances of it getting any better after take 2 or 3 most are very, very, very slim, at least in my world. I'm not playing the same thing again. So if I like it, then I'm keeping it. And if I don't, maybe I'll come back later. I was reading about a book by Ted Templeman, the producer, and he was talking about working with Van Halen, and Ted Templeman's deal with a lot of bands as a producer was, we're going to do 2 takes of this now as a band, the bed, and if we don't get it, we're going to do it again tomorrow. We're not going to do it again. We're either going to get it in those 2, and maybe I'll comp the 2 takes together, but beyond that, we're not sitting down to parse through these sections. We're going to play it, and we're either going to get it or we're not. And if we don't, we move on to the next one, which is a nice approach, at least for me. I think it's a little more honest.
I had an epiphany in the late 70s when I went out to LA to record, and I was working with famous people, including a very famous drummer. And they would go out, they'd listen to a tune, and the musical director, who was a pianist, was Al Jarreau's pianist, who actually co-wrote Breaking Away. And he would go through parts of the song, and he'd play the parts, and he'd say, this is this chorus, and this is the verse, and it goes from here and goes to there. And then they'd go out, 5 people, and they'd get in the studio, and they'd play it once through. And then they go, okay, well, without listening back, they'd say, let's do it one more time because I'd messed this, I did that. And they'd play it a second time, and they say, okay, let's listen. They come back in, and I'd say, well, you would listen back, and I'd say, well, that's great, but maybe in this section it could be a little bit better. I was the producer. I hired Gentle Giant's engineer to engineer that, whose name I don't remember. They turned and looked at me and said, we're not doing it again. That's the take. And I looked at them and I said, I'm paying you $1,000 a day cash to do this. What do you mean you're not doing it again? And that's the take. But it should be different in the chorus. Tomorrow, we'll look at it again and we'll think about a different way to do the chorus. But for today, that's the take.
Interesting.
Yeah. And they were right.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing held together in a vibe. You want a different vibe? Tomorrow we'll be in a different headspace and we'll do a different vibe. And then of course they all went out to score some heroin and shot up.
So they were in a much different
vibe. How was the take the next day?
Next day,
we
redid it. I think we might have done one of the tunes again differently, but only because we changed the structure, really changed the structure.
But that's a lot of that logic is you hired me to play the way I play, and if you don't like the way I play, then I'll pack up else. And you bring somebody else in.
It's a Steely Dan approach, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Take someone's drum kit, but then bring Jeff Porcaro in to play it, or however it worked. Which is right. I mean, I like that. If you have the liberty to do that, then then you can do it.
It depends whether or not you have like you say, the liberty and the option.
Yeah, right. Of course. Sometimes you're stuck with Dan as a bass player, and then you just got to get what you can out of him. And then
I can't come tomorrow.
Seems to be pretty good. So.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'll bring in my friend Chuck Rainey. Don't worry, Dan. You met Chuck, right? Okay. So. So as you know,
Maybe you want to get
But Chuck
Rich
doesn't
in.
remember you.
so
Brown?
you know,
Yeah.
you're working in Humber, and I know that you are
No longer.
no longer, but
longer.
for a long time at Humber, in the in the music production department. What how did you find working with like the kids nowadays in terms of what they wanted to get out of a studio? Like, is it the same sort of uh-oh is it the same sort of, you know, ideals and drives and desires as perhaps it was for 35 years ago, people getting into the business?
For me, yes.
Yeah.
And Jamie, I don't know if you know the background. I think Dan does, but I'll try and do a very brief thing. Is that I was not a teacher, of course. I was an engineer
Yeah.
producer, and that's
Yeah.
what I did for 40 years or so.
Yeah.
And when they decided to do a Bachelor of Music program as opposed to a diploma program at Humber, the head of the department phoned me up and said, what do we have to do to make it modern? Because we can't take a U of T degree and use it. We're not allowed. We got to
Right.
make a new one. And
Right.
I said, well, every musician that gets out there has a laptop, and every laptop gives them a studio, and he makes them an engineer and a producer. And they don't know what they're doing because they're musicians and they're not supposed to know what they're doing.
Right.
So what we need to do is integrate some production courses into it, not to make technicians, but to make playing musicians aware of the technologies and how to make decisions concerning those technologies. And they
Right.
said, that's a great idea. Give us some outlines. So I sent them 4 or 5 different courses. They put their academic team together and made them into real academic courses. And then they submitted it to the government, and the government, instead of taking 6 months, it took 6 weeks to approve it, which is quite amazing. And they called me up and said, listen, we're not starting in 05, we're in 06, we're starting in 05, and we need a studio by 07 to teach these courses that you did in. And I said, well, do you have money? And they said, yes. And I said, hallelujah, a good Leonard Cohen tune.
Yeah.
And so from 205 to 207, I built a studio for them, and oversaw the design and the contracting, and went in and got them to remove all the nails after they put them in. You don't use nails in a studio, you only use screws. Very important. Actually,
Okay.
very important. Sounds trivial, but it's really important. And
How come?
Write that down, Jamie. Write it down.
I'm writing
nails loosen.
Uh-huh.
And things start to rattle because you've got loud sound waves happening. And so you want it screwed in tight. And then while I was doing that in 06, they said, well, listen, we need to hire staff to teach these courses, because all the people we have are the Pat LaBarbaras and the Kirk McDonalds and the Rich Browns and the people who actually are great musicians and can teach music, but don't know that much about production. There were a few that did know something about it. And I said, well, I'm not a teacher. I don't teach. I can give seminars, but that's just a bunch of people listening and clapping after or booing. And so they said, well, we think you can do it. And of course, it's an open thing. They have to post it and take the 35 candidates that come in. And I actually got hired. So then I had to take courses and learn how to teach.
To your great surprise.
Well, no, I mean, kind of knew that. And I learned that you don't teach anymore. You facilitate learning.
Right.
The new buzzword in 07 anyway. And so I did that and was very successful at it. I got Distinguished Professor Award in 4 years of being there, which normally takes at least 10. And then when I quit in 2016, I did a video interview for someone, and they said, well, you've done all these projects, Leonard Cohen, David Bowie, Peter Frampton, Celine Dion, the one up above my head, the little known Diana Krall.
Buddha?
I'm sorry?
Dan?
Buddha? I was
Diana Krall. It's
the one above your head.
Yeah, she's up above my head. Yeah. That's Diana Krall. It's her first one. We discovered her. And what was the most exciting project you ever did? And I thought about it for about a minute, and I said, the most exciting thing I ever did was teach at Humber. It really was. And I still have friends from there. I'm chairman of the advisory board of the Toronto Undergraduate Jazz Festival, which is in its 6th year this year. In spite of COVID, we're actually going to have one on Labor Day weekend. And a festival, that is. And I work with a couple of other artists. One of them is a group called Mono Whales. You might have heard them. They had a huge tune. They actually made money.
Oh, wow.
And they started in about 14 or 15, 2014 or 2015.
Right.
And finally broke through last fall. You know that one tune? Dan, do you have any experience with that?
I don't think so. Mono rails?
Mono whales.
No.
Like a whale. Like a...
No. I'll look it up on my other device here.
You have some experience with that one tune that does well?
Oh, yes. Dan definitely had experience with the one tune that does well.
I don't know.
No, with a tune that does well.
Oh, yeah. The one tune that does well. Yeah.
That's a polite way of saying it.
And well, they reached their peak and like it was all happening in March, and then by March they had got big checks for sync rights and stuff, and they actually said, well, we can give up our day jobs. And then of course, no work for 5 months.
Know it well. You mentioned
we are familiar with. Yeah,
you did mention David Bowie there, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people that are interested in what stuff that you were working on with him.
David was in town. These are moments in life, and I had worked with Peter the year before, Frampton, and he was doing a concert. Bowie was doing lots of concerts. And his next stop was New York, which was funny because the next day I was in New York and went to the concert, but. He was doing an MTV special, and so he brought some tracks in and direct from the concert, like at 11:30 at night, and we worked on them till 4 in the morning while the 707 was waiting on the tarmac in the airport. And he did some vocals, and we did some percussion touch-ups and a guitar touch-up, and mixed them for an MTV special.
Nice.
I didn't do much else with him. I would see him from time to time because, again, I knew Peter. I used to go up to Peter's place in upstate New York. And then he moved to Cincinnati.
Who moved to Cincinnati?
Peter.
Peter Frampton moved to Cincinnati?
Yeah, he's in Cincinnati, and he's got a disease, right? It affects the motor control.
With his hands, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I was sad to hear that. But then David died on my birthday last year.
Oh.
He was a day older than me.
Happy birthday to David. And
yeah.
To you, I'm sorry.
That's as we get older, that happens. Our friends pass away. Hopefully we don't.
Yeah.
You never know. And so, that was that. So then I worked with, because she was local, and I knew Renee. I had worked with Renee before, her manager, then husband. I'd done an album with him when he was in Les Baronets. He was a singer, guitar player.
Right.
I remember when he came in the studio and said he was...
Mr. Celine Dion was a singer, guitar player? Mr. Celine Dion was a singer and guitar player before he was...
René Angelil.
I did not know that.
Yeah, in a group called Les Baronets.
Yeah, I remember.
And he came in the studio and said, I'm giving all this up for this 13-year-old girl, and we all told him he was crazy.
You weren't alone, I don't think. I think that was the general...
It was really tough for about 7 years. Really tough.
Well, you had the faith.
Yeah. And he got together. I did the first English.
Sorry. What was the first English record of Celine Dion? What was her first record?
She did 4 tunes. Not her first record, English record. She did 4 tunes, and it wasn't particularly successful. And then she went away for a year, and I couldn't find them. I don't know where they went, and came back and actually spoke English.
Right.
because before she didn't speak
Oh,
English at all.
that helps in making.
And if you know
Wow,
anything
phonetic
about the
singing is.
well, if you know that it's not the phonetic, it's the tonic accent. Where do you put the tonic accent? If you speak French, there is no tonic accent
Oh, interesting.
in the French
Right.
language. Grammatically,
Right.
there's no
Wow.
tonic accent. However, if you're doing straight 8, where's the tonic accent? It's on the 1.
Yeah.
Right.
Boom, bum, 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 bum.
Yeah. But if you're doing French, if you sing it on the 1, the tonic accent, it doesn't sound like French. It sounds like a foreign language. So you have to sing it on the 1 end. You have to swing it.
Yeah, right.
Which is why 3
Interesting.
works. 6,
Right.
8 works, 3 works,
Crazy.
but 4 doesn't work. Straight 8 doesn't
Right.
work.
Hence all the ballads
Interesting.
from.
You know,
I did want to wind
da, da,
back
da,
and ask you
da, da.
something, which that I'm probably going to have to listen to a lot of French music to confirm that, but I believe you. I had a question, which was that when you were talking about Humber and going into develop courses, you were saying that what was your intent was to inform really musicians about how to, in effect, record and produce themselves. Would that be a way of describing that?
Not at all,
And
actually. Not at all.
Part 2 would be.
I'll make it clear.
Okay.
We wanted to inform them as to what the technologies were and what available to them. So coming out of the 4th year, they should have been able to answer, when do I need a live room and when can I do it in my bedroom? When do I need a $10,000 microphone?
Okay.
And should I put it with a $100 preamp? Wrong thing. You know, get the $100
Right.
microphone with the $1,000
Right.
preamp. That's a better thing. It's kind of like making coffee, right? You don't buy the $1,000 machine until you have the $300 burr grinder,
Right.
because it makes shitty coffee anyway.
Right.
And then what's 16-bit and what's 24-bit, and what's the difference, and why is 24-bit
Right.
better? We first tried to teach them logarithms the first year, and we watched a few musicians' heads explode, and we watched the ladies who were taking the course cry. It was pretty sad. So we decided logarithms was a bad idea. And it's really just give them a general overview. They never touched a console.
Huh.
We brought in engineers to touch the consoles. That wasn't, if they wanted to become more
Right.
technically oriented, a lot of them did, and a lot of them went on to went to McGill and got a master's of audio engineering. There's quite a few of them.
Right.
But it was really to make them aware of the technologies and why a bit rate is not a bit depth, and what's the difference. So don't throw, and so they could
Right.
ask questions to engineers, intelligent questions, and hopefully get intelligent answers back, and that would help them make a decision of what engineer they wanted to work with.
Right.
That was the goal, was to make them aware.
Yeah, you got to
It
go
feels
through
like
all
this
that
is a
stuff.
course both Jamie and I should have taken. We learned all that stuff. If we learned it at all, we learned it by clicking options on a control panel. Like,
Yeah.
48. That's a nice number. 44. I like 44.12. That looks cool. But nevertheless, I think. Jamie and I are of, again, this is I guess how I started, and perhaps how we'll wrap up, is that we are of a generation that knew, we grew up listening to vinyl and to tapes, and we knew the difference between like a chrome tape and a normal bias tape, and couldn't explain why, but nevertheless you could hear the nuance, and or in some cases, this tape is shitty and that tape sounds better and I'll pay the extra $1. But nevertheless, it was a very informal experience that more or less has informed, in part, I would imagine, informs, Jamie's recording style or my recording style. Like, I know how to do this. I don't know why, but this has worked out for me. And I know maybe a little more than some other people about the stuff, about the gear. And but nevertheless, it's amazing to hear you talk about how you basically walked into music with the same approach as Jamie and I did, which is like, this is cool. I want to feel this certain way when I'm in the presence of great music. Maybe I can take a chance at making it, or in your case, recording it and influencing it. And here we find ourselves, however many years later, with a wealth of knowledge. Yours, I think, more articulated than ours, but nevertheless, we're all fans of music, and recorded music in particular, and we're fans of yours. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh,
Yeah,
let's do
thanks,
it
Ian.
again. There's
Learned
lots
a
more to
lot.
talk about.
Oh yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, there is lots to talk about.
Take care.
Good.
Okay,
Right
fellas.
on. Thanks.
Good night,
See you
everybody.
guys. We'll see you now
Thank
next
you.
week. Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.